The Odyssey was one of the best movies that I've ever watched. And in this time like that we're living in, there seems to be a lot of like attention span kind of problems. Like people saying like, oh, like we have the attention of a goldfish now. People are kind of joking because of TikTok and the rise in shorts. Yet this 3 hour movie captivated so many people for 3 hours, not seconds, 3 hours. And I think that's one of the most amazing parts of it. Now I'm going to delve into a review about it, and at the start I like to go through the negatives before the positives first. So I'm going to go through what I didn't like about it and then what I did like about it. But like as I said at the start, it's probably one of my favorite movies that I've ever watched, and I would watch again and again over the years. Like I could see myself watching it in 50 years. I could see myself watching it again tomorrow. But first, I think the most obvious one is casting Matt Damon as Odysseus. Odysseus is like this creative, intellectual character. And to be quite blunt, Matt Damon does not convey that across at all. He doesn't seem like he has a lot going on in his head. Sure, he's an actor, he's kind of creative in that sense, but he's not the best choice for Odysseus, and he's not my Odysseus. But with that being said, he did the best that he could do, and it was pretty good, to be honest. It was pretty good. Apart from that, there's just little things, little tiny bits in throughout the movie, you know. I don't know whether this was actually just because of the cinema that I was in, so I watched it in IMAX. There was a few moments where the light was too bright and too shiny. It was kind of flickering in points in the sky or on some people if it was too bright. I think that's because the camera was focusing on darker points and trying to get them across, and then this light became too blaring. It could have just been the cinema I was in. Also, there was a line through the middle at one point, which might have just been a hiccup. I think that was just the cinema. That was not actually the movie. But to go through the movie, the first point was a plot at the start. So as they're coming back from Troy, they find this island, and you know they follow the sheep, and there's a cyclops in the cave that they get stuck in, and immediately I thought was the door to the cave was open, and all the sheep were out, and the cyclops was out. The cyclops didn't see them, and they didn't see the cyclops. So let's say this island's fairly big, whatever. And then, but that logic kind of leaves you with like, so he leaves the door open when he takes the sheep out. So then when he comes back, he can herd them back in, go back in, close them back in, you know, kind of like a pen almost. But like they get free range during the day, but then at night they get locked in, so they don't die by other means or whatever. Yet when Odysseus and his men go up to the cave, you know, they get stuck in there. And then they're stuck in there for presumably at least a day. And when the Cyclops goes out with the sheep again, he locks the door behind him so then they can plan. But then he didn't do that the day before, so the only reasoning for him to be closing the door during the day was so that he could keep the men in there. And, you know, he didn't give them food, he didn't give them any water, he didn't give them any supplies to keep them going, which is also kind of like, if he has the logic to think of keeping them in there, but then to go take his sheep out so then he can keep them fed, so then they can stay alive, so then he can eat them for later on, and he's presumably keeping these humans to eat later on, then it's just a little bit weird. And then of course, towards the end of that scene where they escape, Odysseus hits the Cyclops again with an arrow. What is it called? Yeah, he shoots it with an arrow. And that part, at first I was like, oh, that kind of seems like it's a bit stupid. Like, why would you do that? You're supposed to be this smart kind of guy. But then I was like, wait a second, he's been in the Cyclops cave for at least a day, seeing his men being eaten and died. He sees this Cyclops and he's just angry, so he fires an arrow at it. Even though it's kind of futile, you know, it's just this moment of anger, and I think that's actually an important moment to have, because then it shows that it's more human rather than, you know, him being perfect all the time, which is actually important in stories. You know, we think we always want the hero to do the right thing, but that's not always the case. Another point with the bow is that, you know, his bow is like this infamous bow that only he can string. And if a bow is that hard to string, then pulling it back is going to be really hard as well. And I've done a bit of archery, so I know what it's like to string a bow. I know what it's like to hold a bow back and to have different kind of gauges, because it's usually in, like, not usually in, but like there's like certain gauges, and the higher the gauge, the harder it is to kind of string up, and the more power it kind of exerts. And in the scenes where he's shooting the bow, he's just like flinging it back like this, basically, like Legolas in Lord of the Rings. And it's just, if that bow is so powerful, if it's so hard to string, then you've got to show that in the moments where he's drawing back the bow. You've got to see the tension in his body when he's pulling that back. So then it's to show the power of the bow, because he's just pulling it back like it's some kiddie's bow and like flinging arrows from it. There was one really awkward moment as well, where there's the giants or the trolls, whatever. And one of the arrows that he shoots, you see it fire, and you can see that the bow is a really low poundage bow, like literally a kiddie's bow, because it's easier for him to pull back, which I get. But in those moments where but since it was a kiddie bow, you could see the arrow shoot, and it just kind of was like, phew. And I was like, oh my God, like that's kind of embarrassing, to be honest. Like, a lot of people may not have picked up on that, but seeing that arrow just kind of go, phew, like you can catch it with your eyes. If a bow is even like, not even that hard, if it's like 30, 40 pounds, which isn't a very heavy bow, you do not see the arrow kind of go, phew. It's like a flash, it's like, phew. So that was kind of just a little niggly point that I wanted to go on. Apart from that, the only other bad thing that I can comment on is the soundtrack. The soundtrack was not memorable, to be honest. Like, there was no melodies that like stuck in my head, apart from like the bang bang, a war, bang bang, a horse, bang bang, a face. That part was kind of memorable. But I guess that was kind of trying to immerse you into that world and just kind of keeping it simple and thinking of what they would have had more back then, rather than trying to modernize it too much. Which is kind of interesting, because a lot of the parts is kind of modernized, but then it is a fantasy at the end of the day. I guess that's like all the bad things that I can say about it, all the bad things that I can nitpick about it. The only other thing that I'll say is that for me, it could have been a bit more deeper. It could have had a bit more emphasis on the kind of deeper philosophies and the workings of man a little bit more. But that's just my own taste. I don't think that would cater to a wider audience. And they still had that, so I'm going into the good parts now. So they had these little one-liners that would just be like, oh, that was like a really good line. Like, for one, there was a scene where they were turning the men into pigs, and this woman was saying that this is what they actually are, this is what they actually are, this is their real form as pigs, and then when she turns it back into humans, she says, go back into your disguise, go back into your disguise, go back into your mask. And that was like a really important scene, how she was emphasizing the impact of the war on other people, to Odysseus, who had basically caused this big upheaval in Troy from his, from the horse and his kind of plot with that. And, she said, these men would be like that anyway, and you're all encouraging them to do that. Like, they're not doing it just because they're following orders to do that. That's what their nature is, and it's up to you as their leader, as the person that they look up to hold them to a higher standard and to keep them in discipline, because otherwise men are just pigs, basically. Which is actually a really good point, and like a important part to the movie that kind of builds up towards the ending as well. But another one was where Odysseus is with Calypso, and she's asking him, even if the truth destroys your happiness now, would you want it? And then he said, well, then my happiness wouldn't be true. It wouldn't be real. And the way that he just says these little lines, like these really deep lines, it's said like as if it's this basic thing, like, oh yeah, there's like a ship over there or whatever. You know, it's like nothing is emphasized about it, but if you just kind of let it sink in, then it has like this deep impact. And I think that those points are kind of in there for people like me that like those kind of good points about like holding yourself up to higher standards and idealism, which actually comes into this concept of the gods and how Odysseus is kind of an opposition to the casual, usual way of the gods in that kind of time and era where they would just do sacrifice for the gods, they would base their life around the gods, they kind of worship them. And he said at one point that the gods favor a man who works for himself or creates his own odds or something like that. And that was just like, that was another really good line. The cinematography, of course, like the first full film in IMAX, the scenes were really beautiful. They were really, like the ocean, the water was really nice. The few sunrise shots, the composition, the lighting was good, although nothing really stuck out to me about the lighting, nothing immediately when I think about it. And then the storyline, how there was 2 timelines and there was 3 perspectives. So there was the timeline of the Troy War and of Odysseus trying to remember it. There was Odysseus in the moment stuck with Calypso trying to get his way back. Trying to find out the truth. And then as a part of that other timeline that I was talking about, the Troy War and then Odysseus trying to come back whilst he's remembering. And then there was also the back home at Ithaca and the kind of dynamic between Penelope, the suitors, and Telemachus. Tom Holland did a pretty good job at playing Telemachus. I can't really fault him for that. Sometimes I find he's a bit awkward or a bit too kind of, I don't know how to describe it, not the best at having grittier roles, but he did pretty good at being Telemachus. Robert Pattinson was amazing at being, I don't know what his character's name was, it wasn't said very often, but when he was one of the suitors, he did an amazing job at that, really good as a bully. He has such like a wide range of perspective, you know, like he's played Batman, he's played, in Mickey 17, he plays this really awkward kid, and then in this, the Odyssey, he plays like this villain, this suitor, and he's just a great actor. That's just what I'm going to say. He's just a great actor. But yeah, the build up to the story was amazing. The different timelines and how they kind of went through them and changed into them felt so natural. Like in the Ithaca, you know, it would be Telemachus, Tom Holland, like talking about something, and then they'd mention Odysseus, and then it would go back to him, and then it would have flashes of the Troy kind of war, and then, you know, it'd have Odysseus trying to remember things, and then it would go into that story like, oh, I remember this, and then it would like kind of go into that story, and that flowed really nicely. What else? The ships. The ship scenes were pretty good, but to be honest, they looked kind of fake as well. I know that they were filmed on the ocean, and that they were like the water coming over and all of that in some of the scenes, like the storms. That was really well done. But to me, the rowing and at times the sail didn't look like it was picking up much wind. The rowing kind of awkward, didn't look very realistic to me. So either don't show that or have specific scenes where you really try to make it look more realistic, because sometimes it didn't look like people were holding onto it properly, or they were just kind of rowing awkwardly. And at times the oars weren't actually dipping into the water and pulling along. It didn't look smooth. That's just me picking on a little thing that I just thought of as I was going through the movie. But yeah, this movie, like, it really touched me. It like got to me a lot. Like I had tears in my eyes for most of the movie because it was really captivating. It really drew me in, and it really got to me, like the story and the, you know, the love, the loyalty, the tension with the suitors, and, you know, the impact of the war on other people. And then, yeah. Again, to go on Matt Damon's acting, also in his scene with the siren song, was really bad, to be honest. Like, it just didn't quite get it for me, because the way the monologue over it was amazing. The words were amazing, like talking about how the siren song was everything that you had wanted but had never gotten, all of your dreams fulfilled, all of your dreams that were just quite out of reach, all of the things that you'd done in the past, all of the bads that you'd done washing away, all of the pain. It's like an itch that you need to scratch, and that it just builds and you can't release that. The tension of having that scratch, but at the same time it's also releasing the itch and having that itch scratched. That monologue was over the scene was amazing, but that scene was not great because of the acting. That's all that I'll say. But overall, I just love the story. Just love the story. I was captivated by it for 3 hours. It flew by. You know, it was deep enough for me to be engaged by it. You know, a lot of movies that I watch these days, when I try and watch something, I get to a point, I'm just like, this is really boring, this is really dull. I can see how they've trying to create it. I've seen the behind the scenes of it. I can see behind the scenes of it, and I'm seeing the illusion, so I'm not getting wrapped up in the story enough, so I can't watch this, or it's too shallow, it's kind of really silly. This was not, the Odyssey was not that at all. It was so I can't put it into words. Like, just like awestruck, and you know, I haven't been hit like a movie like that for a long time. I would really recommend watching it. I feel like I've harped on a lot about the little niggles and the bad things because I don't know how to describe the good parts of it so well. You know, like, I guess the best thing you can say is that it made 3 hours fly by, and it made 3 hours worth it, and it made the whole experience worth it. Like, I spent the whole day just to go and watch it. Like, I traveled 4 hours back, a day trip, 4 hours there, 4 hours back, basically just to watch this movie. And it was 100% worth it, and I would do it again, and I would have the trip be longer, and I would watch it again and again. I would do it several times. That's what I can say. So yeah, I had another video planned to come out today, but I'm going to have this come out because it makes more sense to have it come out sooner with the release of the Odyssey, because it's kind of time-based rather than the other video can be released whenever, basically. So yeah. What else can I say about it? That's it. Just watch it. So thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.